Thank you very much for coming. Can you hear me, or is my mic not switched?
Good.
Is this switched? Not switched? Oh. Excuse me. Okay. My ears are really odd shaped, so I don't have anything to pin this thing on. Okay, you can hear me better now, right? Thank you so much for coming along this morning, and thank you to the college and to Sean and Kathy in particular for having me. The last time I was in California, I was actually homeless, living in my car for some of the time. And I had finished this journey around the world by human power a few months earlier, and I had been offered a 6-figure advance, over $250,000, for my story by a big name publisher. But for reasons I'll explain later, I had to turn the money down. It was just an impossible situation. The upshot of that, however, was I found myself far from home in California. Away from my family support base. I didn't have any money, didn't have anywhere to live. So it was a kind of a tough time the last time I was here. But I'm very happy to be back, and I'm really excited to tell you about my story, which I hope will illustrate to you that if you stick to your guns, if you maintain what you know is the right thing to do in life, if you just stay the course, it will pay off in the end. So, rewind 20 years back to the early 90s. The idea of what lies over the horizon has captured the human imagination ever since our earliest ancestors walked out of Africa some 2 million years ago. But it wasn't until 1522 that the world was first circumnavigated by 18 members of Ferdinand Magellan's expedition to find a route to the Spice Islands by sailing west. Magellan himself was killed in present-day Philippines. Since then, the world has been circumnavigated numerous times under sail, and in the last couple of 100 years, following the advent of fossil fuels, we've seen round-the-world journeys completed in everything from aeroplanes, motorboats, even hot air balloons. But in 1992, shortly after I left university, my friend Steve Smith discovered that there was still a way to do it that hadn't yet been thought of. And it didn't involve complicated sailing ships or expensive motorized forms of transport. It involved the simplest and perhaps the cheapest mode of propulsion of all, just the power of the human body. So his idea, and he was working as an environmental scientist at the time in Brussels, and he was sitting at his desk and he was bored of his job, and he was looking out the window at this sort of rainy day, and he just thought, I'm 25 years old, what can I do that's like a grand adventure before I get stuck into the rat race? And this was before internet days, and he discovered, however, that no one had yet gone around the world by human power without using sails or motors. So his idea was biking or walking or rollerblading over the land masses and kayaking between the islands, swimming between the rivers. The big question, however, was how to get across what he described to me as the big wet bits, the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. The Pacific, look at the size of it. It's 9,000 miles across. It's almost half the planet. How do you, could you kayak across the Pacific? I don't, unless you were really insane. I'm only moderately insane, by the way. So we obviously needed a boat that was strong enough to withstand the power of big storms and big waves, but was not so big that we couldn't carry all the food and provisions that we would need for anything up to 6 months at sea without resupply. Two friends of ours, Chris and Hugo, came up with a solution. A 26-foot long by 4.5-foot wide boat built entirely out of wood and powered by pedals. And this boat would also carry all the food and provisions that we would need, as I said, for up to 6 months without resupply. One person pedals at a time, the other person can sit opposite, and they can make food, they can navigate, they can repair things, and there's a forward sleeping compartment, so you can also stretch, one person can sleep at a time. And one advantage of a pedal boat versus a rowing boat is you can have a sliding hatch here. the slide is a bit washed out, so you can't see it too well. But so when you get into heavy weather and you want to protect yourselves from the element, you can slide the hatch closed. Whereas if you're in a rowing boat, you're always exposed to the elements, basically. And we call this boat moksha. Moksha is a Sanskrit word. It means, the closest translation into English is liberation or freedom. Now, the one thing that Chris and Hugo neglected to tell us before leaving England was that this was the first boat they had ever built. Which is a slightly disconcerting prospect. So one thing we needed to make sure was, before we left England, was to make sure this contraption actually self-righted if it capsized in a storm. And it did, which, as you'll find out a bit later in the presentation, is a really, really good thing. This actually happened. So after 2 years of planning and preparation, we set off from the Greenwich Meridian line. This video clip doesn't have any audio on it, unfortunately. But the first thing we managed to do on this multi-year journey was get completely and utterly lost, trying to find the A21 to Kent. And has anyone here been to London? Yeah? Have you? It's a big city, right? Yeah, it's a massive city, and we had managed to commit the cardinal sin of adventurers. We had set off. We had like charts of the Atlantic, we had charts of the Pacific and the Indian Oceans, and we even had star charts for celestial navigation. But the one map we had forgotten to bring with us was a London A to Z, which is basically a street map of London. Yeah, not a good start. But we did eventually find our way to Portugal, bicycling down through France, Spain, and Portugal, and then we faced our first real major challenge, crossing the Atlantic to Florida, 5,000 miles, just by pedal power. And the reason why we left from Portugal is because in the northern hemisphere, the winds and the currents go in a clockwise pattern, both in the North Atlantic and the North Pacific. In the southern hemisphere, they go anti-clockwise. So we would actually, because we don't have a motor or sail, we're really at the mercy of the winds and the currents. So we were following the same track that Christopher Columbus, Magellan, a lot of these early voyagers, the route that they took to do their circumnavigations or to go off, like Columbus exploring what he thought was Asia, actually turned out to be, of course, North America. And this was the last land that we saw for a very, very long time. And it's the southwest tip of Portugal. And I'll never forget that first day, pedaling out into this vast expanse of blue, and silence descended all around, and the support boat went back, and land dipped below the horizon astern. And this really was the point of stepping off into this abyss of not knowing. Not really knowing how it was going to turn out. Before this, I used to be a window cleaner. After college, I set up a little window cleaning business. Steve also had no experience as a so-called adventurer. We had, I think, 3 days' worth of sea experience between us. And we had this boat that we didn't know if it was going to float or what. So there was this real, I mean, I don't know if some of you can relate to this, but our lives, our modern lives, are, for the most part, quite safe compared to our grandparents' generation, certainly. You know, we kind of know what's going to happen most days. We know who we're going to meet. We know what's going to happen at the end of them. And there is a danger of getting into a bit of a rut. In London, I was definitely in something of a rut, and Steve was in a rut also. But, so this feeling of like pedaling out into this ocean really was like stepping into a void of not knowing. But in retrospect, looking back on it, I think it was one of the best things I ever did. Because I think it's when we take that step, we leave our comfort zone and we do something which actually terrifies us. That's when we really challenge ourselves. That's when we really get to know who we are as a person. And if we just live our life in one valley, we'll never know what else is out there. So I think, A, if you really want to know who you are, you do need to sometimes step outside of your comfort zone. You need to take that leap of faith into the unknown. And the second thing is, I think that when we take these leaps of, and I'm not talking about pedaling across oceans, of course. I'm talking about doing something different in life, or taking on a challenge, or if we have a dream, just beginning it. That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing, is if you have some idea, some dream, that other people might say to you, you're crazy for doing that. You don't know what you're doing. You don't have the experience. And you might doubt yourself. The most important thing is to begin it. It's just to commit to your dream. Even if you don't know how it's going to work out, even if you don't know how you're going to get the means to keep going, you'll figure that out later. Time and time again on my journey, just when I thought all was lost, I'm going to fail, I'm going to have to go home, or some disasters happen, somebody or some situation has occurred and allowed me to carry on to the next stage. But you can't foresee that when you set out. So you almost have to have this faith that things are going to work out. And time again, the universe has, in some form or another, in the form of a person or a situation, has sort of come to help me in a sort of time of distress. So the main thing is to begin your journey, to begin your dream, whatever it may be. The way the boat works is much like a recumbent bicycle. So you've got a front sprocket arrangement, and there's an 8-to-1 ratio, except instead of a back wheel, there's a propeller. And the propeller spins at about 300 RPM, and this moves the boat forward at a fast walking pace, which I can tell you is a tortuously slow way to cross an ocean. It's terrible! Like after about the first hour of pedaling, you're thinking, oh, this is really stupid. It's like, this is why people invented sails, right? And motors. Duh! But of course, by that time we were committed, and we didn't want to go back and have to admit to our friends. Now, one person pedals at a time, as I mentioned. The other person can sit opposite, they can rest. But one of the big reasons for only having one person pedal at a time is shipping. Our horizon there is only about 12 miles away. So our biggest fear was for both of us to be sleeping and then to wake with the sound of big engines throbbing in our ears and to be run over by an oil tanker or something. So with one person pedaling at a time, we always were looking out for another ship in case it was coming towards us. All of our food was dehydrated. My dad got this stuff donated. It's all dehydrated British Army rations, which was great because this stuff can be really, really expensive. But it wasn't until we were about a week into the voyage that we discovered why the British Army had given this stuff to us for free. And we were looking on the back of one of these packets of biscuits and cookies, I should say. And the sell-by date was 1984. They were all 10 years out of date. Nice. But not to worry, we had 4,000 Mars bars that Mars UK had donated to us. And the motto, Mars a day helps you work, rest and play. Is anyone good at math here? 2 people, 4,000 Mars bars, 111 days, which is what we ended up taking to pedal across the Atlantic. That's 37 Mars bars a day. I'd never eaten another Mars bar since. I tell a lie. I had Mars bars in the Pacific, and they actually turned out quite useful, but of course nutritionally they're hopeless. It's just sugar. So anyway, we had these bars, but it gives any Mars bars to eat. All of our food, our water was, we had to desalinate using this pump because the boat, being quite narrow, so it would slip through the water with minimal resistance, it just wasn't big enough to carry all the water that we needed. We had all the food, but we didn't have all the water. So this is a desalinator pump. You suck the water, you pump the handle, it sucks the seawater up through one of those tubes, and it removes the salt. And the purified water, minus the salt, is actually, once you get away from coastal pollution, is probably the best tasting water you could ever have. So, but it took an hour of pumping. For every gallon took an hour of pumping, and we needed a minimum of like 1.5 gallons each a day for our basic living needs, cooking and drinking, not enough for washing. So that was 3 hours of pumping that we had to find in and around 12 hours, all the peddling. And I thought it was going to be just like, I have so much time on my hands. I'm going to get it. I even took like Japanese tapes to learn. I'm going to learn Japanese when I get out there. And there's not a minute of spare time. And so the Japanese language tape went over the side after about the first week. Just no time to do anything. You're always so busy. Our electricity, so even though we don't have an engine, we've got lights. So navigation lights, we've got a little VHF radio, and the electricity for those appliances was generated by a wind generator and solar panels. So this boat is like a little self-contained entity, right? We're generating everything ourselves. Apart from the food that we brought with us, we're sort of like a little survival capsule out there on the water. Now, occasionally, our dehydrated British Army rations were supplemented with offerings from the sea. This is Unlucky Jim, and he's a flying fish, of course. And I was pedaling along one night, and totally dark, and I heard this thump on the side of the boat. And in the morning, got up, looked over the side, and there was Unlucky Jim, dead in the gunnels. I know, it was very sad. Yeah, very sad. Have any of you seen Life of Pi, the film? Yeah, you probably relate to this. I mean, you would get whole shoals or flocks of flying fish, which would it be? Shoals. They would break the surface and they would be hitting the boat. This was quite frequent, actually, that we would have flying fish hit the boat. But this was our first one, Unlucky Jim. And so he was dead, so we put him in the frying pan for breakfast, I'm afraid. But they're not very good eating, actually, flying fish. Actually, that's the reason why we called him Unlucky Jim, because he was unlucky enough to hit the only solid object within like 100,000 square miles of the open ocean. I mean, what are the chances, huh? What are the chances? But yeah, as I said, they're not very good eating. They're quite bony. So we decided one day that we were going to catch some much better tasting fish. And you get these things called Dorado. That's not a Dorado. That's a lure, which we got off this mad German U-boat commander, former U-boat commander, who we met on Madeira. And he'd given us this lure without the little eye on it. And he said, this is the most amazing lure. You will catch more fish than you know what to do with this. That's my German accent. It's really terrible. We go, okay, Heinz, his name was Heinz. We'll try it out. So we'd had this thing out for like a week and a half, trolling it, and caught nothing. Completely useless. And so we thought, okay, this lure needs a makeover. And we had these little felt tip pens, and we drew these just beautiful eyes on the outside. We thought, we're going to make this lure really attractive to the fish. And literally, within 5 minutes of putting out this new improved lure, we had this 35-pound Dorado fish on the line. Yeah. But this was actually the only fish that we caught. I'm such a hope, because with no refrigeration, so of course we wasted most of it. We could only eat so much of it before it went off. So it just seems such a waste. They're beautiful fish, mahi, Dorado fish. When they're in the water, they're like this beautiful, like green, turquoise color. And as soon as you take them out, they go steel gray. And anyway, it just seemed like unless we eat all of what we catch, we have the delicious army rations, and we have like 5 billion Mars bars. Let's just, only catch fish if you really, really need to. Now, I'd like for you to imagine just for a minute, being out on this little boat with your significant other, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, or your husband. And imagine after about a month at sea, you're not able to actually, they're always within 5 feet of you. So imagine some of the things that might start to irritate you after a while. Come on, we all know, right? We've all got them. Leaving the toilet seat up, the cap off the toothpaste. What's that? Yes, smacking. Leaving like the shower plug with hair, so when they get, you know, us guys, right, we want to take a shower and, you know, you can have a shower and it's like water comes up to your knees because the plug holes jammed with, no disrespect, ladies. But so after about a month at sea, these little things started to irritate us. For me, it was the way Steve smelled after a month at sea. And I can't explain it, it's the weirdest thing. He smelled like old rabbits, that's what I wrote in my journal. And the way he used to fart during meal times. Sorry, that's gross. Just have lunch. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, come on, guy. I know we're out at sea, we're in a survival situation here, but still, can't we be civilized about this whole thing? We're pretty to maintain decorum. Splendid. And for him, of course, I didn't know about this at the time, because also being Brits, we would rather be dragged by wild horses before we'll actually admit to having emotions, let alone sharing how we feel about stuff with each other, right? So, of course, I learned years down the road that the thing that annoyed him about me was the way that I would blow my nose over the side between my thumb and forefinger, because you don't have handkerchiefs or tissues, and the way that apparently I would shuffle into my sandal before a pedal shift. Anyway, so, but these things started to build up and build up and build up until we were literally at each other's throats after about 6 weeks at sea. And the straw that broke the camel's back is the way that we used to do our laundry. And I'm using the term pretty loosely here because laundry for us entailed tying what clothes we had left after 6 weeks at sea, after what hadn't been washed overboard, tying them onto a length of rope and towing them behind the boat for a few hours, which of course made no difference at all to how filthy they were, but it gave us a feeling, a psychological feeling like we were keeping on top of things. And the most important thing when you're in a wilderness environment like this is to keep your stuff, is to maintain a routine, feel like you're on top of things. If you let things like hygiene go, then it's a slippery slope short slippery slope to insanity and despair. So one day I had forgotten about my laundry, quote unquote, and I had no idea how long I'd had it out there. And the first I knew of this was Steve pulling in this sodden bundle, holding it up to my face, accusing me, and saying, "Lewis, do you know how long you've had your laundry out there for?" I had no idea. And he says, 3 days. You've had your laundry out there for 3 days. And I worked something out. That at a quarter of a knot's drag, over 3 days, that's an extra 12 miles we're going to have to pedal because of the friction. I'm like, you've got to be joking. And he did not like being on this boat. And we had this huge row, this massive argument. Almost got to fisticuffs out on deck, which would have been actually probably the best thing. But of course, we weren't arguing about the laundry. We were arguing about all the other little things that have been building up over the weeks and months. Yeah, we can all relate to that, right? It's never about the fact that, whatever, he's come home a bit late after, you know, having one more beer at the bar, or she's lost her car keys again. Tammy? It's about, you know, it's the toilet seat being left up, or it's the shower plug hole being blocked with hair. It's those little things that get to us after a while. But this played into what happened a few weeks later. A big storm came through, and the waves got really, really big, 25, 30 feet high, and every 300 or 400 waves, you'll get something called a rogue wave. And a rogue wave is a wave that is twice as big as any other wave in the surrounding ocean, and it's caused by a confluence of winds and currents. And a couple of minutes after I took this photograph, we switched positions. So I was pedaling in this position here. Steve was standing in the hatchway making water. And I felt one of these rogue waves come up behind. And I knew it was a rogue wave because the stern of the boat, the back of the boat, tilted such that I was looking down the face of it thinking we were going to pitch pole, which is when the stern flips over the bow. Not a good thing to happen when you have the hatch open and in heavy seas, for obvious reasons. You could sink. At the last second, the boat shot down the front of this wave like a surfboard, and the steering is a bit like a go-kart, so you've got a couple of toggles going back to connected with rope back to the rudder, And we were going so fast, like 12 knots, which is about 15 miles an hour, that I lost all control of steering. And the boat broached, which is it slewed around to port to the left, and it capsized. And I just remember being upside down, and the water was planing in, and I couldn't see anything. And I thought, this is it. This is when the boat's going to fill up with water and we're going to drown. At the last second, the boat self-righted. So it was a good thing we did that test back in England, right? So the boat self-righted. Okay, that was great, but it was half full of water, total chaos inside, pots and pans clanking around, Tupperware containers. I tried the electrics, like the radio, that worked, so brilliant. Okay, we've got electrics. And then I noticed there was something really wrong with the picture. Like something had changed massively. And I realized that my partner was no longer there. Steve was gone. And my initial reaction after the whole laundry debacle was, yes! Got rid of the photo. It's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? But there was a moment there, I've got to say. It's like, relief of a boat without another human being. But, of course, that was shortly superseded by this terrible, crushing feeling like he's gone. And on this boat, it's really long and narrow, so without a motor, it's really hard to get the stern around in heavy seas to go back and get somebody. And the boat, being wood and having quite high windage, which is the amount of boat above the water that can catch the wind, will actually be pushed by the waves and blown by the wind quicker than you can swim after it. So this is one way that you can die. I mean, you can be run over by an oil tanker, catch some hideous disease that you don't have antibiotics for or whatever, medicines for, and to get separated from the boat. That's the third way that you can really die on a small pedal boat out at sea, for those of you who I know are just champing at the bit to go out and do this. So I was looking at the surrounding ocean for anything that I could throw like a rope to, like a hand or a head, something, and there was nothing out there at all. And I thought, that's it, he's been knocked unconscious and he's drowned. And then I heard this knocking sound against the hull of the boat. And I looked down the length of the boat towards the stern, and there was what I thought initially was a mooring buoy. And I thought, what's that doing by the rudder? And I looked closer, and it was actually Steve's bald head. It wasn't funny at the time, I tell you. And I thought, oh, that's Steve, what's he? And he turned to look at me, and he had this expression like he just seen death. And I never forget that expression. And what happened was, as he was being washed away, this trailing line, we had this rope trailing, wrapped itself around his ankle long enough for him to catch a hold. This was like 100 feet down, away from the boat, to catch a hold of the rope and pull himself back. And that's what saved his life. Actually, it was our sloppy seamanship that saved his life, because we shouldn't have had a rope trailing out there, but anyway. But after that time, he never recovered from that. He didn't really enjoy being on the boat before that, and after that, he was really pretty nervous. But eventually, day 111, we arrived in Miami, Florida. So yeah, the good old US of A. I gotta tell you, you Americans have been amazing. The Brits did not want to sponsor us. We had no funding before we left out. Nobody wanted to support this thing. We got 4,000 miles past, that was about it. We arrived in Florida literally with $50 to our name that a passing ship had given to us. And we arrived literally just wearing the clothes that we were standing up in, $50. And we just started, we were swaying around there on the quay, and, because after you've been at sea for 3 months, you lose your land legs. We were swaying around, and we had these 1,000-yard stairs, and we were covered in these things called salt sores, which I'll tell you about later. And we just started to have to network, meet people, get a phone, start, get some media going, put the boat on display, make us 3,800 names of people who paid $20 for their name on the side of the boat. And that's how we funded this thing. It was all through organic funding. But if it wasn't for the America has been amazing. Americans were very, very good to us throughout this whole thing. If it hadn't been America, this thing would have died. Absolutely, guaranteed. Yeah. Thank you, America. So, no prizes as to why there are 2 routes going across the US. By the time we reached Miami, we were seriously about to throttle each other. So we decided that before the Pacific, 3 times the length of the Atlantic, we needed a bit of a break from each other. We could travel separately. So Steve would bicycle across the southern states on that blue line. I would use rollerblades, which sounded like a fantastic idea at the time. The only problem was I had never rollerbladed before. But I had this theory, like, if I can do 1 mile on these things, then I can do 5,000 miles to San Francisco, given enough time. And you can apply that theory to almost anything in life, yeah? You don't have to know how to do something. You don't have to be an expert to begin. You just need to begin. Anyway, I got to say, a mile out from Miami, I'm seriously rethinking this whole theory. It was so hard, and every 10 feet I would fall over. So I had to hang on to Steve's shoulder for the first 300 miles to St. Petersburg, and then we went our separate ways. But my other theory was that on rollerblades, this might be a really interesting way to see America. Because on bike, everyone's ridden a bike across America. I mean, lots of people have done that. But no one at that point had yet rollerbladed across the US. And I wanted to see and meet real Americans. I wanted to see small-town America. What is this small-town America? I wanted to, experience the raw underbelly of small-town America. So I thought with rollerblades, I'll get to meet people. And that was the case. I got to meet people all the time. People would stop me and invite me into their homes, and it really was a great catalyst to experiencing small-town America. I have to admit, though, occasionally that theory went a little too far. I was rollerblading through Alabama, and as you saw, back then I had long hair. And one night, 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up. I would just sleep off the side of the road. I had a little poncho to keep the rain off, carried everything in a rucksack on my back. One morning I woke up in excruciating agony, and I've been bitten by fire ants. You all know what fire ants are, right? Yeah. They are mean little suckers, they really are. And they had not only bitten me, quite a number of them, but they'd chosen the one part of my body that I could not apply DEET to without putting myself in hospital. I'll let you use your imagination for that. A very painful place for the male anatomy, put it that way. So the next morning, I was in such pain, I couldn't wear my usual lycra shorts. So I thought, I'm going to need something more, loose-fitting here. The next town, I went to the thrift store, and I asked the old lady, I was like, do you have any loose-fitting, anything baggy, maybe some basketball shorts or something? And she said, no, you don't have any of that. The only thing I've got is this woman's skirt. And actually, it wasn't it was a pair of culottes, with the division down the middle. It's kind of like a pair of shorts, but it's for women. But so I didn't think anything of it. It would cost 50 cents. I thought, okay, what's the big deal? It's such pain. So I stuck them on behind a tree, and off I went, thinking, who cares? Well, of course, it turned out everyone cared. I had this vivid memory of rollerblading down this highway in Alabama, my long hair streaming out behind, earrings, rollerblades, and my skirt, and all these truck drivers would be coming up behind, and they would be honking on their horn, and then they'd get parallel with me, and they'd be looking out the window and wolf whistling at me, come on, sweetie, come on, give me a kiss. And they see my goatee and they're like, oh my God! It's a dude! Yeah, so the whole rollerblading thing, nice theory, but sometimes you get a little bit, you can see a little bit too, the underbelly, raw underbelly of America can be a little too close. Here's a little bit of video of crossing the US on rollerblades.
It's all about technique going up here on skates. If you get the right technique. It's actually not that hard at all. Unfortunately, I haven't got the technique.
By the time Steve was approaching the west coast, Jason was only halfway and in serious trouble. He was hit by a car whilst rollerblading in Colorado. Both his legs were shattered, and he was lucky to be alive. Rebuilding the bones would be a long and painful process over many months.
I was rollerblading into this town called Pueblo in Colorado, and it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was still daylight. I was on the hard shoulder of a four-lane highway, thinking that I was safe. Because normally when you're rollerblading, you take up a wider swath of road than when you're biking. So normally on the two-lane roads, I would always have to be looking behind me to make sure that, you know, I didn't get run over by any traffic. On this hard shoulder, I thought, I'm safe. No. Unfortunately, I was run over by an 82-year-old drunk driver with cataracts. Yeah, it's like, how can you... I got the 3-for-1 deal, you know. Not only drunk, cataracts, and 82 years old. It's like, you know, what can you do? What can you do with that? First thing I knew of this was this incredible sense of force hitting me from behind. I didn't know what happened. I was fully conscious. I was lying by the side of the road. A split second later, looking up at the sky, wondering what had happened. I felt no pain whatsoever. So I tried to stand up, and that was when I tried to stand up, and I looked down, and I noticed that my skate boots were actually pointing backwards, and I was standing on the stumps of my tibias. One of those really, you know, like, oh man, this really sucks. This is a bummer. The driver hit and ran. He was stopped by another motorist a mile up the road, and my backpack, meanwhile, had gone through the windshield and was in his wife's lap. And when the cops asked him, why did you carry on driving? He said, we thought we'd hit a deer. Yeah, so one of those really very unknown species, very lesser known species of backpack-wearing Colorado deer. So anyway, I ended up in hospital for 6 weeks. And at first the surgeon told me I may lose my left leg. It was so badly shattered, I may lose it below the knee. It would have to be amputated. And at that point, I thought I was going to have to go home. End of expedition for me. But my luck was about to change. The surgeon, a Canadian guy, Dr. Downshot, very nice guy, let me stay, let me recuperate up at his family's bison ranch. And this was 7,000 feet up in the Colorado Rockies. And so I started to recuperate, and I was on the antibiotics. And he put these metal rods down through the middle of the tibias to try and promote healing. So a bit like a kebab stick, right? You got all the pieces of bone together. And we really didn't know if I was going to keep this left leg. And I was there for 9 months. And while I was in a wheelchair, I went around to local schools, and because I had nothing else to do, really. So this really was the start of a big educational initiative. And I started talking about the expedition, but also working with teachers on developing curriculum around adventure, and also developing intercultural exchange programs. And the expedition would end up being this perfect tool for connecting kids from different cultures. So after 9 months, my tibia is still connected with metal rods still down to the middle of my tibias. I tried to skate again. And I put on the skates at the same spot that I was hit, and I just thought, I'll just see how far I get. You know, and this is Arizona. And I remember this is what they call Band-Aid surface, right? It's just gravel chips sprinkled on tar. And I remember the pain of like rollerblading over this uneven surface and the vibrations up through my legs. But ironically, that turned out to be the best physiotherapy for my broken legs, was actually rollerblading over this uneven surface, because it was promoting the healing between the bone fragments. But, and this photograph was actually taken not far from here, Corcoran. Has anyone been to Corcoran? You're from Corcoran. So I rollerbladed over to Tehachapi, up through the Central Valley, And this is an old guy that I met just outside Corcoran, and his expression is actually fairly typical of the kind of reaction I would get from most Americans, like, "You're doing what?" Yeah, and I remember it being so hot. This was August, of course, the worst time of year, and it was so humid and hot. And I remember, you know, up through the Central Valley, you can't just go diagonally. I was trying to get to San Francisco. You're like Pac-Man. You have to sort of go. You can either go side to side or up down. You can't actually go where you want to go. That'd be quite frustrating. So got to San Francisco eventually, and became the first person to inline skate across the U.S. solo. Met up again with. Thank you. Met up again with Steve, and by now we were a little bit older and wiser, and we decided to pedal together across the Pacific Ocean, 9,000 miles to Australia. The first leg was to Hawaii, 2,400 miles. It took us 53 days. Now we had a big educational initiative on the go, so we had, by this time, the internet had caught up with us. We had something called a website, pretty cutting stuff for 1998, and we had kids following online. And you know what? This is the thing. I know that accidents in Colorado was just a disaster, the potential real trip ender. But I look back on it, and I think, you know, if that old guy hadn't hit me on the road, I wouldn't have spent that 9 months there, and I wouldn't have got to find what my real passion is, using the expedition as an educational tool. And I probably would have given up this expedition partway through. So in a way, sometimes, you know, something that happens that's just terrible, that's a disaster, but we look back in retrospect, and it happened for a reason almost. It's like sometimes, you know, there's a silver lining, and something, you know, there's always good that comes from bad, is what I'm trying to say, if you can look at it that way. So we arrived in Hilo, Hawaii, and this was the point that Steve decided to leave the expedition. We were already 5 years into this project that we thought would only take 4 years maximum, but because of because of having to raise all of our own funds, because of the 9 months recuperating in Colorado, it was taking so much longer than we originally thought. So at this point, he decided, I just don't enjoy being in this boat anymore. And I think after nearly drowning on the Atlantic, he was also reconsidering spending another, you know, 6 months in this boat to get to Australia. So I carried on alone, diagonally across the Pacific towards Australia. And after 43 days pedaling, I entered a 400-mile wide countercurrent just north of the equator that the nautical experts had told me would be virtually impossible to cross in a human-powered craft. In a motorboat, no problem. Just gun it and blast across. But my 1.5 knot speed was the same as the countercurrent heading east. And I remember that first day in the countercurrent. I pedaled for 18 hours. And then I was exhausted. I had to sleep for a few hours. And woke up, turned on the GPS, and I was back where I started from the previous morning. Second day was the same. And the third day was the same. I was basically pedaling on the spot. For 2.5 weeks, I went nowhere at all.
Lowest point of any of the voyages right now. You know, when you're going forward, there's always hope. Even if the conditions are awful, the boat is full of water and it's freezing cold or whatever. As long as you're heading forward, there's always hope. The fact that I'm not able to actually move forward is a very, very, very demoralizing thing.
So how do you keep going? How do you keep pedaling, or whatever it is? How do you keep going when you're not seeing any progress whatsoever? Now, this was the most demoralizing part of the whole journey for me, for sure. And this is something which I'm sure we can all relate to, right? We've all been at that point of feeling like we're trying as hard as we can. You know, we're doing everything we can, we're just not able to move forward. And I got to tell you, at one point, I really considered giving up. You know, I thought, I'm just like, I'm pedaling, I'm going nowhere, and 1 hour pedaling on the spot is bad enough. 2.5 weeks, and one day, I curled up at the bottom of the boat, and I cried. I just had reached the end of my tether, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And we've all been there, right? In some form or another. But there's a couple of things I want to share with you here that really helped me get through this dark time. First of all, the human body is capable of incredible feats of endurance if the mind can buy into it. And that's the thing. I discovered this while lying there, crying like a baby. And it occurred to me that the boat was going backwards in the countercurrent. And as long as it was going backwards, there was a greater chance of, at some point, running out of food and other provisions and starving to death. And so it is survival instinct here. And I realized that I had to keep pedaling. You know, because the alternative, running out of food and water and starving to death or dying of dehydration, was much, much worse. So, you know, when we think we've reached the bottom of the barrel, when we think we can't carry on anymore, of course we can. It's just a mental thing. It's just a matter of perspective. You know, when the stakes are high enough, we can do whatever we need to do. It's incredible what we are capable of if we need to do it enough. That was the first thing. The second thing is that around the whole notion of goal setting, you know, sometimes just focusing on the end goal, for me, getting across the countercurrent 400 miles wide, is too much. And we need to narrow our objective down to smaller, more tangible increments. And so for me, I started looking forward to little psychological carrots like the next cup of tea in a Mars bar. I'm British, right? I can't live without tea, black tea. So I would look forward to my next, and this is where the Mars bars come in again, right? The Mars bars actually turned out to be quite useful because they were like little things to look forward to in 2 hours' time. Every 3 or 4 hours, I would look forward to a hot meal. And food becomes an incredibly important psychological factor when you're in a wilderness environment like this, where nothing is changing on a daily basis. I had a little bottle of whiskey on board, which someone had given to me as an afterthought before leaving Hawaii. And every 24 hours, I would have a little nip of my whiskey. So,
cheers. Ah, yes.
So I did eventually get out to the countercurrent. And I remember the day, actually. It was morning. I was pedaling away like a hamster on a wheel. And I saw this riffle of air coming across the water from the southeast. And I remember leaning forward out of the pedal seat in the open hatch to get the cooling effect on the left side of my face, thinking that this was just, the air would just peter out. But instead of dying away, the air actually started to build to a steady breeze. And pretty soon I could start to feel waves underneath the boat. And the doldrums, as the countercurrent is also known, is otherwise flat calm. You know, it's an area of low pressure, so it's just flat calm, there's very little wind. So I started to feel this movement under the boat, and this was a tremendous moment, because it meant that I had reached the Southeast Trades. And if I had reached the Southeast Trades, then I could get into the Southern Hemisphere, and I could reach Australia. So in one sense, I was really, really lucky, because the countercurrent will actually fluctuate. Sometimes it'll get wider, sometimes narrower, depending on the seasons. And the southern edge of the countercurrent had come up to reach me. So in that way I was lucky. But in another sense, if I hadn't found a way to keep pedaling on the spot, I would have been too far north for the southern edge to reach me. I actually have a friend who rode across the Pacific a few years ago. He never got across the countercurrent. He was stuck in it for 5 months. Finally had to be rescued off the Philippines. So what I take away from that is that, sometimes we don't see progress on the chart, or in our real lives. We don't see manifest results in our life, and that's okay, you know, because sometimes it's all we can do to just maintain. If there's one thing we can be certain of, though, and that is that nothing stays the same for long. And if we can just find a way to keep pedaling, in whatever form that might take in our lives, on an expedition, in our personal lives, or in our studies, or in our career, if we can just find a way to keep pedaling on the spot, then circumstances will eventually change in our favor. Once you've been at sea for about a month, you'll get something called salt sores. And salt sores are very painful. They're basically when your sweat pores get blocked with salt, and they can become infected and blow up into these disgusting boils. And this really is a result of not being able to have a proper shower. I didn't have enough fresh water to have a proper wash. So this is a problem that mariners have been experiencing for centuries. And like I said, the only real solution is to have a proper shower, which I couldn't have. So I thought, there's got to be another solution to these. You know, there's got to be another way to get around these salt sores. And I thought, I'm going to figure out something else. I'm going to find another solution. And I went about it very scientifically. I divided my body up into 4 areas. Okay, and on my left buttock, sorry, that's disgusting. On my left buttock, I tried calamine lotion dipped on a piece of towel. On my right buttock, I tried just a bit of water, like a controller in a scientific experiment. Under my right armpit, I tried this recipe for stewed cabbage that a 5th grade class in Indiana had emailed to me. And I had this bit of moldy old cabbage left over by this point in the voyage, and I was desperate. I was like, I'll try everything. None of it worked. You know, the only thing that ended up working was WD-40. It's an amazing thing, WD-40. It's I actually pulled this off the internet earlier, and I'm not being paid to say this. WD-40 is you can lubricate prosthetic limbs with it, which would have been handy for me. You can keep pigeons off your balcony. Apparently they hate the smell. It attracts fish. That would have been handy. And this is. I wish I'd known this one earlier. You can use it for fire ant bites. Apparently it takes the sting away and stops the itching. So WD-40, 43 uses for WD-40. It's a miracle. Eventually I did make it to Australia, and I had an interesting experience. I had to transfer from the pedal boat to a kayak, and this is because I couldn't get across the Great Barrier Reef in my pedal boat. So the last 22 miles I had to paddle in a kayak, and about 50 feet before making landfall on the Australian continent, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I looked behind me, and there's this 15-foot-long crocodile tailing me. And it was my worst nightmare come true, you know, being stalked by this crocodile. And he wasn't actually that interested in me, he was just interested in my kayak. Because from under the water, apparently I learned this afterwards, a kayak looks rather like a crocodile. So he thought that I was an imposter, my kayak was an imposter coming into his territory. So I just paddled as hard as I could to shore, jumped out, turned around, and he was gone. And he'd gone back into the water, and I thought, phew, that's a relief. I started ferrying all of my equipment up to the high tide mark, and about 5 minutes later, I was looking down the beach. It was a shallow beach, and I noticed that the croc was coming back, and he was going for my kayak that was parked by the water's edge. And I had everything that I needed to survive in this boat. I had my water, I had my food, my satellite phone, everything. And I could not afford this to lose my kayak. This was a very, very remote part of Queensland. So I just remember running down the beach with my paddle in my hand, not really knowing what I was going to do. And I got to the kayak was here, the croc was coming the other way. And I stuck my paddle blade over my kayak, and I just tried to shoo it away, like, shoot, go away. And of course the croc opened up his mouth and just latched onto the end of my paddle and wouldn't let go, like it was a sort of giant lollipop. And then we were having this sort of push me, pull you, like, oh, I really need that back, please. And I thought the only thing stopping this thing from basically clambering over my kayak and eating me is this paddle blade. Anyway, crocs have a little flap at the back of their throats. So I thought, okay, I ended up pushing the paddle blade further away from me into the back of its throat, and that forced the croc to release the paddle. And then I just remember belting this thing as hard as I could over the head, broke my paddle blade in two, but it was enough to frighten the croc back into deeper water. I write the book myself. I'm actually moderately dyslexic. And I was writing in my car, and then Lynn Kemmer, who I believe you know from the library, she's the librarian here. Lynn found me somewhere to live, temporarily, in Monterey, at a friend's house, somewhere where I could keep on writing. And then I met Tammy Stevens, who was behind the camera. Tammy's here in the green jacket. Tammy was running an animal rescue in Colorado, and she convinced me that as long as the story is good enough, and it's told well enough, and it's edited well, then there's no reason why it couldn't be published independently. And years down the road, we've now published 2 books out of the 3, and the first one, Dark Orders, that is available after the talk here outside, has won several literary awards, including the most prestigious in the US here, the Benjamin Franklin Award. So I guess it has paid off. The gamble has paid off, not just in terms of my integrity, but also financially as well. We've done as well as if I'd taken that 6-figure advance. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here, just to finish off, is there is no magic to any of this. You know, I was a window cleaner before this journey, remember? You know, anyone in this room could circumnavigate the world by human power if they wanted to enough. And that's the thing. You know, what is our passion? What do we feel strongly about? What is it that floats our boat? You know, if we can find what we love to do, then chances are we're going to be good at it, and that also raises the likelihood of being successful. And then the rest of it, unfortunately, is down to just hard work. There is no substitute for hard work, and perseverance, and never, ever giving up. Because if you believe in yourself enough, then you will find the means to keep going, even in the dark times, and you'll get there in the end. Thank you for listening.
We have his 2 books that have been published so far. They're available out front on the patio, and you are all invited to a reception right now. So if you'd like to join us and have a chance to meet Mr. Lewis, purchase a book, get an autograph, take a photo, we'll be right here in front on the patio right now. So come on out and join us. We appreciate you coming out, and have a great and wonderful afternoon.